Holy ghost! Ghost!
There's a
Uh-oh.
That feels by frantic 8.
Random bullshit, go.
Uh-oh. No, Griff! No, Griff! Griff! No! Okay, so this one is one that I'm absolutely going to have to eat my words on, even though most of you have probably never even heard my opinion. You see, here's the deal about me. I have this thing against the flavor of the week game. If you're asking yourself what a flavor of the week game is, well, it's pretty simple. It's a game that doesn't have a whole lot of substance, that gets a ton of widespread mainstream attention for no real reason. It explodes in popularity for like 2-3 weeks, and then is dead as a doornail after that. Think Lethal Company, Among Us, Fall Guys, etc. These are all games with an extremely limited shelf life, and because of that, my opinions on the flavor of the week games are exactly what it probably seems. I don't bother getting involved because it's gonna be gone in a week anyway, so what do I care? Believe it or not, I'm very frugal with my money, and it takes a fair bit to get me to go ahead and buy a game, and so because of that, I usually pass up on the flavor of the week games. Helldivers 2, for all intents and purposes to me, was a flavor of the week game, but it can't be that, because it's been a year. Yeah, for the first time in history, a flavor of the week game isn't actually a flavor of the week game. Holy shit. And holy shit is right, because this game kicks major ass. Despite some low points, from its launch all the way up until its most recent resurgence, Helldivers 2 has never really even come close to quote-unquote dying, despite what some of the player base might tell you. And there's a lot of good reasons for that, and those reasons are things that I'm planning on discussing today. Anyways, without further ado, this is my review of Helldivers 2, the flavor of the week game that just didn't die. Gameplay is of course going to be the bread and butter and the thing that's going to be constantly bringing people back for more, and it's where Helldivers 2 repeatedly hits it out of the park. I think the most important thing is the fact that Helldivers 2 is a strictly PvE focused game, which means that all of the decisions that they make about the game can be entirely PvE focused, and they can just ignore the aspect of PvP completely. In the modern age of gaming, for some reason, PvP is just a staple of seemingly every possible game. Every game's gotta have some PvP mode. And because of that, it has a tendency of taking away from other aspects of the game. So because Helldivers is specifically relegated to a PvE game, that experience can be curated to all sorts of different players. I think one of the most important aspects of gameplay for Helldivers 2 that continues to keep the entire game fresh and give it a wealth of content despite the fact that the game, in all honesty, doesn't actually have a whole lot going on, something that I'll be talking about shortly, is the fact that there are 3 different enemy types at the time of recording in this game that you can fight against, and the ways that they approach gameplay are all radically different. When it comes to fighting automatons, these are very highly armored enemies that tend to shoot projectiles at you. And because of that, you're going to want to be bringing weaponry that has armor penetration, as well as bringing in different things that might be able to deal with projectile weapons, whether it be shield generators or turrets that can strike things from afar. If you move over to the Terminid front, however, this is a whole bunch of really fast-moving enemies that will get right up in your face. This means that something like a shotgun or potential flame weapon is advised. Unsurprisingly, flame weapons, not the greatest against the metal enemies in the game, but against the bugs, it's really effective. And then there's the latest faction that's been added to the game, the Illuminate. These guys are sort of their own beast right now because they play very differently from the other 2 factions, sharing some similarities and some differences, mostly stemming from the fact that a lot of their tech relies on energy shields and such. Anyways, the point is that all of the tools that you have in the sandbox at your disposal at any given time all have their different uses against the different enemies in the game, and for the most part, if you're bringing a quote-unquote one-size-fits-all solution to all of the different maps in the game and all of the different enemies, well, There's not really a great reason to do that because it makes a hell of a lot more sense to specialize against the specific enemy you're fighting. And because of that, it prevents the age-old problem where someone picks one specific loadout and they just exclusively use that one specific loadout on every single place they go. That said, I did run into some issues where against certain factions, I would just find myself running the same or a very identical loadout every single time because it felt like it was just the best option, and it also felt like basically every other tool was just inferior and wouldn't be as helpful. I'm not sure if I'm the only one who feels that way, but it did happen. The other thing that I did want to mention is I talked about how the game didn't have a whole lot going on, and well, that's sort of the truth. For the most part, the objectives that you complete in Helldivers 2 are just tedious tasks, things that you don't really care about. You go and push some buttons and move some levers, and that's really about it. I don't think this directly takes away from the game for the most part, as the adversary that you're fighting is kind of more important than the objectives that you're doing, and because the game can get really frantic, that's probably why they made the objectives so simplistic. But I would be remiss not to mention the fact that when you just go to a spot and push a button a few times, it's not super engaging gameplay. Now, just like pretty much any other third-person shooter on the planet, your character is equipped with grenades, a primary and a secondary weapon. But where Helldivers 2 really goes crazy where most other games would not is in the stratagem system. This system, while having a lot of flaws with it, is also extremely fun and surely the highlight of the entire game. Basically, your giant-ass spaceship in orbit has the ability to call down ordnance at any given time when you request it. Whether it be a big-ass laser, a borderline mini-nuke, or something as simple as calling in a mounted gun, there is a wide variety of different stratagems that you can bring with you into missions that really make the sandbox so much more interesting than it probably otherwise would be. It is unbelievably entertaining to have airstrikes at will that you can use to wipe out massive hordes of enemies. And the idea of giving the vast majority of these stratagems unlimited uses and just having them on a cooldown prevents yet another one of those age-old problems of people just hanging on to their ordnance and then never using it because they're afraid that they'll get to a point where they might need it later. With the cooldown system, you see a problem, you might as well throw an airstrike at it, and that's just fun. Now that said, as I mentioned, stratagems do have their problems. I think the most important problem with the stratagem system is the fact that all stratagems are treated as equal when all stratagems are absolutely not equal. Like, I'm sorry, there is just no planet where a smoke barrage is anywhere near as powerful as a napalm barrage. It's just not close. Being able to launch a static field and stun enemies sounds pretty handy, but at that point, why wouldn't you just drop a 500 kilogram on their head and blow them to smithereens? Now, Arrowhead did try to balance the stratagem system with the weaker stratagems having lower cooldowns, but at the end of the day, I just don't think this works successfully whatsoever, and it's a system that I think should be redone, albeit I doubt it will be. I think in a perfect world, the stratagem slots would be less based on the amount you had and more based on the power of each individual stratagem. So basically what I'm getting at is there would be something akin to Call of Duty Black Ops 2's Pick 10 system, but with stratagems. So each individual stratagem would be worth X amount of points. And so if you wanted to bring a whole bunch of less powerful stratagems, you could do that, but you would also just have the ability to bring in a couple strong ones. I get that this take is probably pretty polarizing, as I'm sure there are plenty of people who like it the way it is right now, and they would be very upset if they couldn't run their favorite combos. And I mean, that could always be solved by just having a toggle, so if you wanted to use the new or the old system, you could. Or an even easier solution to that would be to make it so that way there is no possible stratagem combo in the game, where if you only equipped 4 of them, it would put you over the limit. But either way, I highly doubt any changes will be coming to the system, and that's kind of a shame because it means that a lot of the quote-unquote lower-end stratagems see absolutely zero use, and they might as well not even be there. I think that point is a good chance to segue into the next part of the video, which is talking about difficulty. So, difficulty in Helldivers 2 is really interesting, and I say that because it's handled in a way that I feel like most games don't do nowadays, but almost sort of feels like a no-brainer. Effectively, what the difficulty increase means is that you'll have more harder enemies spawning, as well as more enemies spawning just as a whole. To my knowledge, the game never touches the accuracy, health pool, or damage of any of the enemies in the game as you increase the difficulty. So that means if you go onto a mission that's level 1 and you shoot an enemy, it's going to take the same amount of shots to kill them and the same amount of shots for them to kill you as it would all the way up on difficulty 10. And in my opinion, I honestly think that this is a really good way to do difficulty. Because at the end of the day, Helldivers 2 difficulty is a lot down to how hard you make the game, rather than how hard the game actually is. There are a lot of people out there, and I've seen the opinion plenty of times, that Helldivers 2 is too easy. If you get 4 people together in random matchmaking, you basically can't lose. And this is true. Those people are right. Now, that being said, I feel like you're setting yourself up for failure at that point, aren't you? I've played plenty of games where squads are really important. The Battlefield series comes to mind. And if there's anything I know about squad play, it's that people have a hard time doing it online. So that being said, I don't see anything wrong with the mission being basically a foregone conclusion victory if you're random queuing with a bunch of people. I also think the overall difficulty in Sandbox being a little bit more lax often leads to the ability for a lot more player experimentation and a lot more just screwing around with your buddies, as it's not constant boot in the ass gameplay. That said, if you're looking to make the game harder, you can absolutely do that. And all you need to do is queue on by yourself. Because going into a difficulty 10 mission by yourself or with one friend is going to be a completely different beast than doing it with 4 people. Difficulty does not scale with the amount of players you have, which means that if you're going in by yourself, you're running up against the same amount of opposition with significantly less ordnance to work with. And you know what? If that's not hard enough for you, you can always go ahead and take in a gun that isn't suited for the task. That'll give you the nice kick in the balls you're looking for. I mean, one of the rounds I went in with a rifle and a bayonet because that seems like a good idea. It honestly was kind of a good idea. The bayonet was very surprisingly effective against the Illuminate zombie enemies, but yeah, other than that, it's like a World War II gun. What the fuck do you expect? But seriously, I don't think difficulty should be as much of a contention point as it is, because I get the feeling that the vast majority of the people who are making this complaint play a lot of this game. And despite that, they probably haven't noticed that if they are playing on random matchmaking, there are a hell of a lot of people out there who would never in a million years beat a difficulty 10 mission if they didn't have a team carrying their backs. I've played with some real trash cans out there, and I don't think there's anything wrong with them being able to hop in, get carried, and still complete the mission. I didn't mention it in the gameplay section, but one of the best things about Helldivers is the fact that because it's a co-op game, everyone gets the same reward at the end of the mission. This can potentially be construed as a bad thing if you're like a super sweaty tryhard and you think that you should be getting rewarded more because, oh, I had the top kills. But the game doesn't see it that way, and it's better for that. It's absolutely a group effort, and if the group succeeds, everyone succeeds, which is really the way it should be. Now, I made small mention of weapons earlier, and I want to talk about the progression next. If there's any low point in Helldivers 2, it's the progression. And I know I'm probably going to get shouted down from the stars and thrown into a dumpster for saying this, because I'm sure it's a hot take based on everything I've seen. But progression in Helldivers is kinda ass. So, just so we're 100% clear, the way that you unlock any weapon in the entire game is through a fucking battle pass. Every single weapon is behind a goddamn battle pass. Are you guys not sick and tired of battle passes by this point? Seriously, now we've got a game that locks basically all player progression behind a fucking battle pass, and it's heralded as the second coming of Christ? Not for me. Now, I would initially give credit for the fact that at least unlocking stratagems isn't locked behind the battle pass, except for, in the recent couple of war bonds, they decided, oh hey, let's put all the new stratagems in the fucking war bond. Great. And yes, I know the car wasn't in the war bond. Shut up, don't put that in the comments. Either way, the point is that the progression system in this game feels like a freemium game, despite the fact that I paid for it. And I know it wasn't full price, it's $40 on Steam, But either way, I've paid for this game, and so I expect the progression to not exclusively feel like I'm playing a mobile game, but it absolutely feels like I'm playing a mobile game at times. People will constantly cite the fact that you can get all of the content in the game via not having to pay money. You can farm the super credits in the game, which admittedly isn't super hard. It'll probably take you like 2.5 hours or so to get a war bond, which, considering that it's quote-unquote premium content, initially wouldn't seem that bad. Except for the fact that all of the game-altering content that's been added post-launch, or at least the vast majority of it, is locked behind these premium Battle Pass war bonds. And it's not like the initial game launched with a huge treasure trove of content, because, it didn't. Especially when you consider the fact that a huge variety of different weapons that you almost need to have in order to open up build variety and make it so you can experiment with different stuff are locked behind the premium war bonds. Having something like the grenade pistol, for example, opens up your grenade, primary, and support weapon slots to equip all different sorts of things, because now you don't need to run a weapon that can destroy enemy spawners. This is a really powerful tool directly locked behind a war bond. And the problem with that is that this is setting a precedent that is genuinely not good. In practically every other game I've ever played where there's a battle pass that has content in it that directly affects gameplay, once the battle pass is gone, all of the content that directly affects gameplay, once it's no longer in the battle pass, gets changed to be locked behind some sort of in-game challenge. This means that somebody logging on to Battlefield 2042, for example, in current day, can go through and unlock any content directly that they want right from the get-go without having to purchase a single battle pass or anything. Sure, they can't get all of the stupid skins and nonsense, but who cares? That's not what matters. What matters is the progression, the actual weapons and things that have been added. But because battle passes in this game never expire, and the fact that they're always available, it means that they effectively get a free pass to lock all the content behind a borderline paywall. This sets a dangerous precedent, and people should be concerned. And they should be really concerned because just recently there was a collab with Killzone 2, and in that they were fully planning on locking multiple weapons behind the in-game superstore, a FOMO store that isn't like the rest of the game. There's no chance that this stuff would have even been possible to consider if the progression wasn't already laid out the way it is. I know that progression obviously isn't going to change, and like I said, I don't think it's that bad, but this is a serious slippery slope, and it has the potential of setting us even further back than we've already been. All I'm saying is, this game's really good, but this is something that we've got to be on the lookout for. So the music in Helldivers 2 is... Okay. But they use the same motif. Alright, fine. It kicks ass. You win. And so we get to the end of the video, and as such, we get to the final score. When it comes to scoring this game, I think it's kind of difficult because on the one hand, I want to dock a whole bunch of points for the progression and microtransactions, even though I know that it's not really a point of contention in the community. It was just so bothersome when I logged on and I realized that all of the progression was battle passes. Like, I legit felt sick to my stomach. I was like, this is what we're promoting? Really? We're locking all future game-altering content behind a 2.5 to 3 hour grind or a 10-hour paywall, plus the grind that you actually need to do in order to actually unlock the stuff in there. That's dangerous. But the thing is, as much as I really want to do that as some sort of big statement, I can't. Even if you never buy a single one of the premium war bonds, for God's sakes, even if you just don't even interact with the battle pass system at all, go in with default weapons and just play the game, it's still one of those games that people are going to be comparing games to in the genre for years and years to come. And something that is just that genre defining can't be understated by a score anything short of 10 out of 10. I know, it feels like I hand out 10 out of 10 scores for games like hotcakes, but at the end of the day, when I'm making these sorts of game reviews, it's almost always only on something that I'm extremely passionate about. And something needs to be said for the death of the current co-op shooter. I feel like we haven't had a really genuinely good one take off in a good long while, and this is the perfect example of how to do it right. So many weapons and tools to mess with, so many different enemy types to fight, 3 different factions, a huge galaxy-encompassing war that I didn't even touch on in this video. It's got all the elements to make a flavor of the week game that you can jump on and play with friends, and yet despite that, it has an actual game underneath all of that that's really solid. And all that's to say that they're only going to be continuing to add more and more stuff to this game as it goes on. The future looks bright. I seriously could not be happier to be starting off 2025's game reviews with one of the best games I've played, period. So if you haven't already picked up Helldivers somehow, I couldn't recommend it enough. That being said, we are wrapping up here. So if you enjoyed the video, you can leave a like and subscribe. If you didn't, don't. And with all that being said, have a wonderful day, night, wherever you are, and see you guys next time.